So today I'm going to be talking about what that means a little bit. I'm not necessarily going to be going too deep on what design thinking is and how to do it, but I will give some resources for that. But my primary focus today, we're going to walk through a couple of case studies on what impact leadership has on design thinking. And so for those of you who are in a leadership position or wanting to move into a leadership position, it'll be interesting to kind of look at the differences between these two case studies that we're going to talk about. So I'll give a quick intro to who uShip is. James did a pretty good job describing me, so I'll skip that one pretty quick. Quick overview of design thinking. We'll go through a couple of case studies and then talk a little bit more about what that means for your role and your current jobs and what that could mean in a leadership role as well. So uShip, we are a consumer shipping marketplace. We were one of the first marketplaces founded back in 2004, and it was really a space for consumers who had things that wouldn't fit in a box to go to USPS, could post something on our marketplace. We would match them with a transporter who could take that item from A to B. Our founder actually got the idea for the company when he had an antique armoire in his family that he was trying to get to his house, and kind of hit a brick wall trying to figure out how to get it there without just renting a U-Haul and picking it up himself. We're here in Austin. We have over 100 employees. And all of our verticals are larger than parcel, but we ship pretty much anything from vehicles to household items. We've shipped roller coasters. We have shipped horses. We actually shipped some German Shepherds for the Army over to Afghanistan. So we've literally touched it all. And most recently in the last few years, we started breaking into the freight space. We started expanding the scope beyond consumer and thinking about what that could mean for B2B. This is me. James already mentioned 2 times UT grad, hook 'em horns. I'm gonna throw that out there one more time. I've been in product for almost a decade now, and while I do still enjoy dancing outside of work, I actually had a brief stint as a professional dancer prior to getting into the product space. So that's kind of my fun fact that most people don't know about me. Okay, so really quick, I'm gonna go into a little bit about what design thinking is. There's a really good book called The Art of Innovation by Tom Kelly. And that book is about IDEO. IDEO is a design agency in California, and they specialize in design thinking and partnering with large organizations to think outside the box for new product lines, pivots in their product extensions, things like that. And one of the principles that I thought really embodied the purpose of design thinking was this quote. It says, "We're big advocates of a principle we call being left-handed, developing empathy for consumers' needs, even if those consumers are different from yourself." So the IDEO methodology has 5 main steps. Understanding the market and perceived constraints. I think as product managers, this is something everybody does pretty well. You got to know what market you're going into. You need to understand how people view that market. The second step is the place I think where there's a lot of opportunity, and where I think a big piece of the design thinking approach comes in, which is observation of real people in real life situations. I feel, particularly at uShip, it's really easy for us to just go straight to customer support because they talk to our customers every day and ask for their feedback and opinions. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but they're not sitting at the computer with the customer. And so when we're trying to talk them through what to do in the workflow, we can't actually see, well, where do they want to click, and what are they trying to accomplish, and what other tabs do they have open? The third step is visualizing new concepts for new customers who will use them. And we'll talk about a couple of tools to do that. Evaluating and refining prototypes with quick iteration. I think prototyping is a very underrated tool that people can use, and those can be super low fidelity. We've taken prototypes to customers that literally I sat down with a sheet of paper, drew a box, and scribbled some stuff on it and put it in front of them and said, hey, what about this? So they don't need to be those, hi-fi, like clickable demo type of thing, although that is wonderful if you have access to tools like that. And then implementing those new ideas for commercialization, take them to market and get them out to your customers. So this is certainly not an exhaustive list of tools. In fact, it's a very, very short one, but I think these are 4 things that I've found myself using multiple times in my career. So I wanted to highlight those, but I also at the bottom here put a couple of other books in addition to the Tom Keller book that go into a lot more detail on different tools and ways to gather information. So the first one here is empathy mapping. This is literally just a sheet of paper to map out what do your customers do, what do they say, what do they think, and what do they feel. And those 4 things can all be very, very different. They may say one thing and do another. They may think one thing about something and feel differently in another area. And so really understanding emotionally who your customers are. Diaries, this is a really, really great tool just to understand, what does the day-to-day of your customers look like? This could be a physical diary on paper. I'll show you guys a tool a little later today of how to do video diaries that we found very useful, but it's really just gathering every single step in the customer journey so that you can better understand, how much time do things take, and are there steps that get repeated multiple times through the day? And it'll start to illuminate places where you can insert yourself to start solving problems. Card sorting is another great one. And card sorting can be used in a lot of different ways. It could be for idea generation. It can be for grouping different ideas together, for understanding how your customer might view groupings of information, process flows. There's a lot of different ways to leverage card sorting. And then prototypes, whether those are lo-fi or hi-fi, as we talked about earlier, putting something physical in front of the customer so that they can touch and feel, and if it's a technology product, they can touch and feel, with their hands how things are working and what the user experience looks like. So why is this all important? In the same way that we in engineering, product, and design follow the agile build, measure, learn feedback loop, design thinking also has a feedback loop. And I've kind of labeled those, learn from your customers, test with your customers, and then build for your customers. And so it really pushes you to kind of think outside the box, challenging your beliefs, and then looking for opportunities to solve problems in a different way. Okay, so going into our first case study, I'm going to walk through a partnership that uShip had back in 2016. The client, who we will refer to as the client, is one of the largest logistics companies in the world. They're based out of Germany, and they grew largely via acquisition. So while they started with 3 or 4 branch offices, they acquired a lot of independent companies. And when we started working with them, they had over 300 branch offices in 30 different countries. And they had allowed each of these businesses to continue operating as independent functions. And so they came to us knowing that we had this marketplace technology that allowed, a customer to connect with a transporter and wanted to see if we could help bridge the gap to sort of standardize and digitize a lot of what was happening very much offline. And so we had 2 key business goals with them. One of them was to improve dispatcher efficiency. When we did our in-person research, we saw a plethora of things from really, really high-tech transportation management systems where dispatchers were sitting with 3 or 4 monitors and transitioning between tools, and everything was digital, even if it wasn't all integrated together, all the way down to branch offices who were managing freight movement on a whiteboard and in Excel sheets, which terrified me in this day and age that people were using Excel to manage millions of dollars of freight, but hey, people do it. And then the other key goal was increasing carrier engagement. And so when you think about the concept of a marketplace, it's really to empower both sides. And that was something we had to think a lot about, because these transporters, their typical workday is waiting for a phone call. And when someone calls because they need something shipped, they pick up the phone and they decide if they want to do the business or not. And then that's kind of it. Where a marketplace enables them to self-serve a little bit more, take a look at all the options on the table. And, in a perfect world, and what we had been striving for, is that the carrier then can go in and kind of cherry pick and plan their route and pick loads that feel good to them and fill their truck effectively and get them on a route that's meaningful to them. And so overall, our hypothesis was that uShip's technology could help them do this, that we were going to be able to integrate all of their branch offices into one platform to increase efficiency, increase transparency, and get that carrier engagement level up. So what did that look like? At the very beginning of the project with them, they had come from a very waterfall organization. And so the concept of design thinking was very new to them. And so we spent a lot of time, bringing them into our process to try and help them understand, what does Agile mean? What are the benefits of it? What are the benefits of design thinking? What do we hope to learn? And we kind of mapped out a high-level plan on, what are the next couple of months going to look like? We talked about interviews, participatory design, prototyping, usability analysis, all these different tools that you can use throughout the life cycle of development, ultimately with the goal of their customers, both the branch offices and the carriers, being an integral part of the decisions that we make on what we're going to build. So we spent, our initial research was 2 weeks in Europe. It was not as glamorous as it sounds. It was in February, and we were in very remote towns that did not have a lot of exciting things to go do, but that's okay. So we spent 2 weeks traveling all over the place. And we did a lot of different things with them, but I would say the vast majority of our time was spent on what you see in this picture here, which is really just sitting down with the dispatchers and understanding what they do. Because we had so many different types of offices to take into consideration, it was really important for us to dig deep and figure out, like, what are the commonalities? What things are consistent, so that we had something to anchor on from a consistency perspective. We did a ton of whiteboarding, a ton of sticky notes. I think when we got home, I had a stack of sticky notes about this high from different exercises that we had done, both with the transporters and the dispatchers in the branch offices. So timeline. So if you read ahead, it's going to be a spoiler alert, but at a high level, it seemed like everything was going really, really well. We defined our project scope. We outlined our research, we started creating designs, and it was when we hit the implementation phase that we ran into a snag. And one of the examples that came to mind that I'll share real quick that kind of reminded me why this probably happened was we were doing a user interview in Spain, and we had a dispatcher sitting with us, and our client was also in the room because we needed help with translation. And so basically we were showing her a panel of like where load management was going to happen. And we gave her a design that had like a very thin, narrow, almost Excel-like format, something they were used to, that had just like tons of information stacked into it. And then we gave her another format, what we called a card, that had all the same information, but it was just taller. It took up more space on the page, which meant she was going to have to scroll more to sort through everything. And so the first question we asked was, hey, is all the information even there? Can you even make a decision based on what's in front of you right now? And she kind of looked it over and said, yeah, like there might be an edge case where I need more information, but 9 times out of 10, like I've got everything I need right here. And we're like, okay, great. Tackled that. Now, which of these visuals do you prefer and why? And we had them printed out on big laminated sheets and gave her dry erase markers so she could kind of note things and cross stuff out or put arrows to move things around. And she picked the card format. And we're like, okay, that's interesting. Why did you pick the card? She was like, well, it's just easier for me to find what I need. When I'm scanning through hundreds and hundreds of loads, to look at it in an Excel format, it's really easy to lose your place. Where if there's only, 3 to 5 cards in my view, it's a lot easier for me to keep track of what I'm looking at. And our client jumped in and said, no, she's confused. What she really needs is the Excel format. And we're like, huh, okay, interesting. And just brushed past it. We continued with the interview. And so fast forward to this implementation moment, we're sitting in the room with them and saying, hey, this is what we've learned. This is what your customers and your users have validated. And this is what we're planning to build. And they were really insistent on rebuilding what they already have. What they really wanted, which was not something that they told us at the beginning, was a recreation of an existing tool, but in a way that forced everybody to use it. And so it was a super interesting dynamic. And while, the research was great for us, we learned a ton out of that experience, which ultimately informed, uShip's decision to not pursue enterprise relationships like that. When we released it, as you see on number 5 here, the users weren't satisfied because we had shown them all this really cool stuff and validated needs in other areas, and then that's not what we delivered. And so we ended up, parting ways in that partnership, I think a year and a half ago now. And they're partnered with someone else at this point to continue building what we started. But uShip learned a lot from that. I think we learned that marketplace technology is super powerful, but it also isn't necessarily the best fit for enterprise functionality. And a lot of that came out of all the research that we had done. I think if uShip had decided, we're gonna pursue enterprise and just run after it blindly, we would have been making a mistake. And so just a nod to the benefit of design thinking in that relationship, but ultimately it was the leadership decision to overrule the work that had been done that derailed our ability to actually deliver something that truly solved their customer's problem. So the second case study I want to talk through is e-commerce large and bulky. And so as I mentioned in that previous example, we learned that enterprise wasn't the right fit for us. We also learned that small and medium-sized business was a really great opportunity for us. These small and medium-sized businesses don't necessarily get access to the best pricing and the best transportation providers because they aren't enterprise scale. And so uShip's marketplace had this unique opportunity to provide a breadth of transportation providers also at that lower cost. It was kind of the network effect of we bring all the loads to the carriers, so now they're willing to give reduced pricing because there's so much volume there for them to choose from. So this actually came out of a beta test. Cherish is a vintage furniture marketplace of their own. And they came to us because they were having that exact problem. They couldn't find carriers who were willing to go to all of these different pickup locations because it was a marketplace. They couldn't get reliable pricing, and the damage rates were super, super high. I won't get too much into the detail of furniture shipping, but a lot of the options out there force you to package it in a big crate or put it on a pallet so that it can be a freight shipment. And a lot of times, particularly with antiques, that causes them to get damaged. So they came to us actually and said, hey, we've been using your marketplace for a while now for sort of these one-off shipments. What can we do to integrate with you guys to start automating some of this process and get more focus on this B2B space? So we were able to give them some existing APIs that we had access to. And I think some of our biggest improvements in areas that we needed to focus more on was that, marketplace was founded on the idea of auctions. eBay was kind of the original auction marketplace. But that means it takes time. So a Cherish, a business who wants to get their customers' products to them as quickly as possible, thank you, Amazon, for setting that precedent. It was hard for them to wait 2 or 3 days to actually book the shipment and then wait for the carrier to pick it up and then wait for it to be delivered. And so they wanted something that was quicker turnaround time. And our marketplace was also founded sort of on that gig economy type of idea. But businesses want certain qualifications of the carriers. A really great one that comes to mind is warehouses. If you've ever been to a warehouse, most of them have those high elevated loading docks for huge, 18-wheeler types of trucks to back up. So they want to make sure that the carrier has the right type of truck in order to accommodate that at the warehouse. And so those were 2 big areas that, working with consumers just hadn't been raised yet, and it hadn't really been an issue for us. So we took this success with Cherish and a few other customers like them that we were able to acquire over the last couple of years, who were doing substantial business with us. We saw our revenue growing. We saw a lot of stickiness in the marketplace, both with our carrier base as well as these shipping customers, and we could prove that there was real pain there. And so we started thinking about like, okay, what do we do now? And so if we go back to those IDEO steps, the first one is, look at the market constraints and the market needs. And so we did some high-level market analysis. And one of the things that was really interesting is that we started all this research back in January, and COVID hit. And COVID has forever changed what e-commerce looks like. I think the stats back in December, I think e-commerce was growing anywhere from 10 to 20% year over year, depending on which blog you were reading. COVID has exponentially increased that growth. So they're estimating now that e-commerce will continue to grow at a 20% plus year over year rate. And so for us, that meant, wow, all of these companies are being forced to get online. And so now that they're not just the mom and pop shop on the corner in their downtown city, they're going to have to be able to ship. They got to figure out how to do that, because their customer could be coming from a city or a state or, halfway across the country at this point. So we built the business case, the board approved it, gave us the green light to pursue some more research on this. And then this looks super similar because it is the exact same slide. We went through the same sort of engagement planning. Who do we want to talk to? We wanted to talk to existing customers. We wanted to talk to customers we had lost. We had a few who, the marketplace offering wasn't a good fit for them, and we wanted to dig deeper on that and understand why. We also wanted to talk to prospects. Who were some, pie in the sky, bigger businesses that we wanted to work with, that we could partner with and understand what their needs are as well. And so we went through, mapping all of this out again. And then we just completed this research about 3 weeks ago. And because of COVID, we had to do it all digitally. And so Mira was a really great tool that we used to kind of facilitate the card sorting activities. We had them prioritize, of all the aspects of your transporter, what's the most important. And you can see here, speed and cost, they couldn't stack rank them. Speed and cost are both equally important. And so for us, looking for trends across different feedback here, and how can we facilitate faster booking and faster delivery, and how can we keep costs low, were two things that we're starting to work through. This is another Miro example. We had them sort of map out what is their shipping process, and comparing that to other customers we talk to. Do they do it differently, or is it relatively standard? Is there an opportunity for us to insert ourselves to make some of those steps a lot less painful, while also looking at this overall experience, like, hey, anything that falls below the neutral line, that's an opportunity for us to come in and change how that process is done. And then Vidlet is the video diary tool I mentioned earlier. We also had them film, all the steps in their process so that we could visually see what screens they're looking at and how they move between different parts of their workflow. Do they sit at the same desk all day? Do they have to go down to the warehouse? Like, how does that work? So that we could start to think about, what information do they need access to when, and how can we help make that better? So we're at number 3 in the process, which is the design process. We've taken all the information, we're going into designs. And why I wanted to share this example is that I think it kind of speaks to, not letting your circumstances get in the way of doing the research. I think COVID was something that made us a little weary of trying to do this research now, but it actually maybe produced better results than we would have gotten otherwise. But also because we're now at this integral moment, an important moment of leadership buy-in and making sure that our stakeholders are in line with what we're trying to accomplish and agree with the path that we're going to take. And so in the next 2 weeks, we're going into senior leadership planning meetings to take a look at all of our insights from our research and start to decide which of those opportunities we want to pursue as a business, so that we can take the design work and the prototyping and all of that and make sure that we're all aligned through the next phases of the process. And hopefully new partners on board, and we just continue to be wildly successful, and B2B2C blows up in the furniture space, and uShip is the one that put it on the map. So real quick, just a couple more slides, and then we can jump to Q&A. These are not novel, but I did want to take some time to talk about, like, as a leader, what is your responsibility? And I think for me, what has been most important and big learning opportunity is the trust and encouragement of my team. I manage both the product and design teams at uShip, and they work hand in hand on research like this because it's so important for everyone who is building for your customer to get in front of your customers. Leaders don't know everything. 90% of the time, you're not the end user of your product. And so while you can assume things, you can learn things, you can see things, you can teach things, watching it actually happen live with the customer is an invaluable experience. And so as a leader, you have to encourage that in your team and give them the time and the opportunity to do that. And as an individual, what does that look like if you're an individual contributor? Advocate, you know, do the research, have the tools ready, and advocate with your leadership team to let you take some of those steps. And what that might look like, I think my first key takeaway here is start small. This does not need to be a pivot into a new industry for your business. That shouldn't be the first time you try design thinking in your organization, and shouldn't be the first thing you take to leadership to try and advocate for this. What you can do is pick something small. You know, we had an individual contributor who had an idea about how transportation providers might want to find shipments. And they came to us and said, hey, what if it was like Uber and we started pushing things to them? This was before Uber Freight was a thing. And we said, okay, yeah, let's test it. So we put together a small tiger team. We built out some prototypes. We got in the cars with the drivers to see what they're doing and how often do they pick up their phone. Like if we send them a push notification, will they even see it? Do they care to look at that while they're driving? And did a bunch of research to try and validate yes or no on that. And it only took, you know, a few days. It was a couple of phone calls, a couple of quick rapid prototyping examples. And ultimately we decided that because we had heard rumblings of Uber coming out with a freight product, that wasn't the opportunity for us to pursue, but it was still meaningful to do the research and see more about how our carriers work. Number two, new things are scary. It's important to continue demonstrating value to your leadership team, which I think feeds really well into the third one, which is find failures. I think design thinking is just as much about proving assumptions as it is disproving, and maybe even more importantly about disproving. Use these tools and the opportunity to talk to your customers to learn something before you ever dedicate any engineering time to the work. I can guarantee you the engineering time is more costly than the research time at the end of the day from a dollar value. And then finally, don't back down. IDEO preaches that major business failures can be avoided by simply observing your customers in their natural habitat. And so anytime you have the chance to do that, get out of your doors or get into a different Zoom location or something like that and meet with your customers, hear what they have to say, learn about their process, and continue to think of creative ways to insert yourself. The thing that I think has really resonated with me over the last several months is that most industries are online already. There's very, very little disruption industries now. I think logistics is still ripe for disruption. I think healthcare is ripe for disruption. Construction is another one that is still pretty antiquated, but in most spaces, technology is there. And so your job is really not necessarily to disrupt their process, but to make the process easier and smoother and more meaningful for them. And so how can you insert yourself in that way? And that is what I have for you guys today. So I would love any questions you guys have, anything I can elaborate more on, and just thank you again for listening in.
Well, Robin, hey, thanks. I know I wrote down some questions, but I want to just open it up to everybody who's joined us today. Really appreciate what you shared. Very interesting. And so for folks who are on our audience, just go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to ask any questions that are on your mind of Robin. Anybody? If anybody's trying to speak. Okay, Tara?
Yes. Hey, Robin, thanks for that amazing overview of how you went about with your design thinking. Um, I know it is not a valid way to look at how you go about in terms of time it takes, but what would you think is the right time you would spend on each of those phases to ensure we get the best of the output? I got what you said about engineering, right? Might as well do the research ahead of spending time with the engineering. But what about other phases ahead of that?
Yeah, great question. So we typically try to get at least 10 customer interviews when we're exploring new things. And I think those 10, if you can work really hard to make sure that you have fair representation of your customer base, 10 is usually a pretty solid number. So we did 15 for this last round, partially because we don't know necessarily who our best customer is yet, and so we wanted to talk to a lot of different people. Also, because this is a potential, very big pivot for the uShip business, and so we want to validate as much as we can before we make that shift. But I typically use 10 as a good rule of thumb, and so usually, the research plan can take a couple of days. Interviews can take usually a week or so, assuming that your customers are readily available, to dedicate a couple of hours of time with you. And then that insights, distilling down your insights and choosing what opportunities you want to move forward with, that can potentially take, anywhere from a few days to a few months, depending on how big of an idea you're working with. But that's why I say, even rapid prototyping, if you're drawing on sheets of paper, you could probably get through this whole life cycle of customer validation within a couple of weeks if you have a team dedicated to it.
This is Dylan. Hi, Robin. Thanks again for this presentation. Awesome overview. Curious about executive stakeholder management within uShip and how design thinking fits into kind of the planning process, and how do you set expectations for things that may not work out, and you've spent 2 weeks or 2 months working on this investigative activity, and how do you set that expectation, and how does that fit into that process?
Great question. I will say when we first started blending these practices into the organization, so 3 or 4 years ago when I joined the leadership team at uShip, we were very much an engineering-led organization. And so the first phase of this was just an organizational transformation to be a more product-led org. And then from there it was, hey, when we say we're product-led, this is what that means. And there was a lot of time spent just explaining what the life cycle of product development looked like from the product and design perspective. I think, we have the benefit of me being on the executive team, and I'm a huge advocate for it. And so I will shout it at the tops of the mountains, like, no, we're following process. It's worth it. We're going to do it. Like, and here's why, and reminding people of that constantly. But it is a balance. We can't do a full design thinking process on every single thing that we build. And oftentimes when you have mature products, it's easy to get into a cycle of not doing it at all because you know what your product is and you know how your customers use it. But to me, that's almost the perfect opportunity to go do it. How do you reinvent something that is super mature or on the brink of sunset? And so I would say a lot of it is just continuing to communicate the value, continuing to help people understand why this is important and what we're saving. We've also started communicating these things in terms of ROI. We could spend 2 weeks of engineering time, which is the equivalent of, let's say, like $40,000 for 2 weeks. Or we could spend 2 weeks of product and design, 50% capacity working on this, which is a lot cheaper than engineering effort. And at the end of this, the result will be the same. We're either going to continue moving forward or we're not. And so why don't we do the cheaper option so that when we get to this decision point, we haven't spent $40,000, we've only spent 15. And so that's something that has also resonated with different executives at uShip. Some people are very tactics and database, some people are more emotion based. And so it's kind of that combination of give them the data, help them understand, why it's worth the investment up front, and then remind them of the value of this long term and what it means for our customer base. And I think now that we've done it a lot over the last couple of years, and we've had wins and we've had losses. It's not such a battle anymore. Very rarely do we have someone say, no, I don't want you to talk to customers. Go ahead and just build it because I know what's best. The second that comes out of someone's mouth, everyone's like, who are you? Like, no, you don't know best. And so it has become a lot more normal for us to talk in that way.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Robin. And there was a question that came through chat, so I'll go ahead and read that. And then for the folks who are out there thinking about what other questions you have. So the question, I don't know if you saw that, Robin, but I'll read it to you. How did you evaluate or come to the realization that you needed to part ways from the first customer? What was the deal breaker in that scenario?
Great question. So what it really came down to, and this probably moves a little bit away from design thinking, but it was sort of that philosophical moment of uShip evaluating, who do we want to be when we grow up? And for us, we wanted to be the technology provider for many. We have never been a client services shop. We didn't want to be a client services shop, and there are businesses that specialize in that and do it much better than we do. And so what it really came down to for us was, in order to continue in the partnership, we were going to have to compromise on what we believed was the best solution for their customer. And I know I mentioned this a little bit too, but we had also kind of self-discovered in the research that I don't know if marketplace is the right solution for them. It probably isn't. And what we'd really want to build them is this thing over here. And so for us, it was really just, we're no longer in alignment with the vision that we have for the business, and we're no longer in alignment with the core values that we have as an organization and who we want to be going forward. So I think it was a tough decision. It was hard to walk away from something like that because it was a huge opportunity for us and big opportunity for them as well. But ultimately, what it really came down to was who are we? Who are we fundamentally, and what do we want out of things like this? So
that's fantastic to hear, and yeah, it does take you, as you said, right, the rigor of the process, going back to the core beliefs and the values and what your company wants, and good for you for making the right call, and that takes courage to walk away with something, especially when there's big money to be had there, right? But good for you. And then there was another question. I'll just read it from Diana Lee. And Diana, if you want to, add on to what I'm saying here, feel free to hop on. Can you describe who is on the team and who is doing what in the design thinking process?
Definitely. Great question. And so I would say at a very, very basic level, both product managers and design need to be involved in it. I know it's called design thinking, but it is just as important for the designer to see how the user is interacting as it is for the product manager, because ultimately, your design team could go build these wonderful user experiences, but product is the one that has to decide on scope and priority. And so if they're not seeing the same thing you're seeing as a designer, then you're out of alignment. And product is potentially making the wrong decision if they weren't able to actually sit with the customer. So I think that's at a very base level. This past time around, I fought pretty hard to get people from marketing and customer support and engineering into the process. So they didn't necessarily facilitate the interviews and the activities, but we had them listen in so that they could also hear from customers and see how they're thinking and hear, we had a couple of people we talked to who I may take a note that says they don't like this page. And to an engineer, that may be, oh, they don't like it. But when you're on the phone listening to them and they are raging about how horrible this page is, that has way more of an impact on the people listening than a note in Slack that I might send to somebody. And so looking for opportunities, people don't need to facilitate this stuff, but find opportunities for them to come into the process and observe what you're doing, which also helps, buy-in. If you've got a particular part of the organization that's like, you know, maybe customer support, we talk to customers all day long, I don't need to sit in your interviews, like it's a waste of my time. Well, actually, no, it's super insightful for some of them to hear what they like about the product, you know, because customer support is constantly hearing everything that's wrong. Hearing what's going well is just as valuable for them. So that was kind of, you know, a new thing for us as an organization this time around.
No, that's great. That's funny. Yeah, because product support, right? You're just like you're hearing about all the problems, not necessarily all the lovers who are out there around your product.
So are your designers leading the design thinking, or is the product manager, like who's the decider?
So we have a couple of senior UX people who have extensive experience in design thinking. And so they are typically the ones leading, but we have made an effort to train up the PMs as well. So this past time around, a couple of our senior PMs also facilitated some of the sessions. And so it really is just a comfort level. I think, you know, anyone can do an interview, but to do an interview in a particular style where you are not, you know, leading the person down a path and making sure that it is truly observational takes practice. And so that's something to, you know, observing a ton of interviews, doing a practice one with someone from the team before you go do it with the customer is probably also a really good idea.
That's great.
So you guys don't have a user research function? That's kind of the UX and PMs kind of both kind of tackle that together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe just to build upon that, Robin, I don't know if you have any recommendations around kind of training for PMs who, right, haven't been maybe formally trained like some of the UX people specifically in design thinking. Is there anything that you'd recommend?
I would definitely recommend those 3 books. I would also recommend just trying it. Try it out, see how it goes. It can be super awkward, and one of the things I've learned, you know, I'm a super tactical person, and I love to jump to solutions. That is my weakness as a product person. And so one of the things that I've really learned is just to sit and listen. You know, like, hey, what do you think about this? And then the customer is like, I don't know. Okay, why? Why don't you know? You know, there's a reason that they don't have a response for you. And so instead of trying to lead them down a path, like the 5 whys are one of the best tools you can use. Just ask why 5 times until they get to the point where you're understanding the underlying emotion or decision that they're making. The other thing that I think would be great is if you don't have a UX capacity at your company, you know, find a mentor or a design group similar to, I know there are a few different meetup groups for UX design, and find a mentor or a person who's willing to let you shadow some of these types of interviews so that you can better understand what that looks like. We have also started recording all of the customer interviews that we do so that, one, we can listen back to them, but also for training purposes. So, you know, we're going to hire another UX person probably in 2021. And if we bring someone in more junior that doesn't have experience with this, we want to give them materials to learn from. So I think, you know, just seeking out people who are willing to share that with you, let you observe, and, you know, I think that's kind of the best way to do it.
That's great. Anybody else have any other questions? I know I have one, but
I have a quick question.
I want to hear from the audience. Yeah, welcome.
Hey, Robin, this is Payam. Thanks for your time, by the way, and sharing your experience.
Yeah.
I'm actually at a startup, so we're just about to look into one of our first products, and it's a consumer product, and not B2C, but B2B, so they're a little bit more challenging. And I'm curious, how would you approach user research if you're trying to work on a product where you're trying to streamline a consumer workflow, where you have to identify who the right participants are, recruit them, and then have them kind of walk you through their process, through their journey, so you can understand their challenges?
Yeah, great question. So the first time uShip ever did any sort of research on our consumer marketplace, we actually hired a research team, an agency team, to help us with that. Partially because participant recruitment can be really, really painful, particularly if, you know, your product isn't in the market yet, and so people don't know who you are. Sometimes they're more willing to talk to someone, you know, like I think, I'm trying to remember who we worked with. We've worked with like Frog Design before. Gensler also has a research team. That's a name that people know. And so sometimes they're more willing to pick up the phone and have that conversation. So I think that's an option. Another option though is to just go where your consumers are. Not knowing what space you're in, I don't know if there are any industry events or stuff like that that you guys could attend. We spent a lot of time in the early years of uShip at South by Southwest, finding people. We went to every single logistics conference that we could possibly find that was affordable for us to travel to, and just started picking people's brains on stuff. So I think going to where your customers are is definitely, you know, the cheapest way to do it. But if you have the budget for it, I think working with a third-party team could certainly expedite finding your participants, but may also afford you more research than you would maybe be able to do with the limited team that you have right now in a startup environment.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Great question. Anybody else?
Will the deck or materials be shared out at the end of this? Oh, perfect.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so what we do is the deck, the video, everything will get posted to the website, as is all of our events that we host, so definitely. I had, I'll just put in one question, and then again, I won't monopolize. I'd love to hear from other folks, but maybe quickly, Robin, you mentioned how important it is research in the environment and seeing your customers, right, do their process and so forth. So was there, like, what kinds of things did you do, during this COVID area where you couldn't necessarily go? Was it all virtual? And if so, what were some of the maybe techniques and things that you did to be able to capture this valuable information?
Yeah, I think the biggest one was that Vidlet app. And what Vidlet allows you to do is set up prompts for users. And so we sent them a list of, 7 or 8 different activities that we wanted them to film themselves doing. And so rather than giving them a general prompt of like, film your entire day for me, and then we end up with like 8 hours of random stuff. It was, show us what your website looks like. What are your, top selling product categories? Where do you manage your inventory? Show us your inventory management page and how you find a product there. Where do you manage shipping today? And how does uShip fit into that process? We kind of gave them a lot of specific prompts to sort of highlight and make sure that we were getting the information that we needed out of their process, but giving them the freedom to show us that in whatever form that it takes. I think that was the biggest one. We also got really creative in the types of activities we did in Miro. We, at one point, I think, I'm trying to remember, one of our customers was like not feeling the card sorting and didn't really know what was going on, was like not wanting to drag and drop stuff around. And so we just shifted the Miro board over and said, okay, draw it. Like, what are you thinking? What do you have issues with? We've pulled up the website with people and just, let them click around and watch them use our interface. And so I think a lot of it, one, making sure that you have a line of questioning to get the information that you need, but also being willing to flex and shift, because particularly for us, like transporters, some of them are not super tech savvy. And so getting them to log into this like weird third-party tool, Miro, that they've never heard of, and, needing to be on Zoom with us at the same time and all this stuff was really weird for them. And so we were also willing to just run it all purely as interview. And I think that's where a little bit of like the UX experience and skill comes in when you're in that type of situation. But the cool thing is that there are a lot of really, really great digital tools out there. And the neat thing for us is we've now got, this big collection of Miro boards with all the data that, usually we would have had someone, sitting there typing vigorously while the interview is going on, trying to capture all of these sentiments.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Other questions? We've got a couple more minutes. I'll ask another question, but again, if folks have something, you mentioned the Miro board. Was that not only your primary tool that you use for prioritization of these opportunities, in your first case study? I think we all as product people, right, the prioritization process and how we go about it, need to whittle down of what do we do can you maybe say a little bit more about that? And was the Miro board the primary thing? And were there other things that you did outside that to kind of prioritize and get down to some of those decisions?
Good question. So I would say this time around, we've done it in Miro just because we've had it. And so it's been nice to kind of have every single person's read, open and being able to just look for trends visually. But back in, the first case study I discussed with that partnership, we actually did it very, very differently because the problems that we were trying to solve were so huge. And so the way that we did that was we actually set up, I think we had, I want to say like 10 of those giant black boards in the room, the ones that are like, 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. And we lined a wall with them. And each board was a step in the process. And so the first thing that we did was put up sticky notes for every single piece of feedback we got on every step in the process. We spent 2 days doing that. And so literally it was just every single thing you heard, everything you saw, put a sticky note on it. And then we spent a day organizing those by common themes. How many times did someone write down, finding the right carrier is painful, really bad example, but starting to group those things by themes. And so then on each of those boards, we started seeing clusters of maybe 3, 4, 7, 10 different themes. And then we used the size of those clumps as well as anecdotal information from our interviews. One of the things we did while we were interviewing was if someone said something with a lot of like gusto, ooh, this is really, really awesome. We had like a starring and color coding system. If they said something with a lot of disgust or, agitation, we had a color coding system for that. And so then we went back and looked at our notes and looked at these themes and added a severity level to each of the themes. So then we could look at the process and say, wow, man, after they book with a transporter, we've got a lot of like reds, a lot of really horrible stuff going on. And that was where we focused first, like, hey, if this is all red over here, then let's dig in on that. And so I think for us, it was like, yes, there's a million problems we could solve, but which problems are the most severe, which means those are the problems where we can have the biggest amount of impact first. And so that was kind of our approach in that one.
Well, awesome. Well, we're getting to the bottom of the half hour. And we do have this session open for 15 minutes for people who want to stay. You're more than welcome to stay. We'll have a chance to chit chat and so forth. So more than welcome to do that. And then I just wanted to open it up quickly, just for a quick shout out. If anybody has anything that they want to share, feel free to come off mute. Could be, hey, I'm working on something cool. It could be, hey, I'm looking for a job. Whatever. If anybody has anything, feel free to share it.
I just saw one more question from Elizabeth in the chat. She was asking about advice for junior UX designers on the job hunt. It's a really interesting time to be looking for a job because I think at the beginning of COVID, there were a ton of layoffs, and now people are starting to hire back depending on your industry. And so interestingly enough, uShip has been doing really well since COVID happened. And I think part of that is that we have transporters who are looking for work, and e-commerce is growing rapidly. And so I think, targeting searches with e-commerce companies, I think those people are going to be hiring like crazy. I know Wayfair in their last earnings call, has like, man, their shares have just skyrocketed. I think they're up like 3x in the last couple of months. And so doing some of that kind of research so that you can pick specific niches and businesses that are doing well to target them. And then she also asked about interviews at uShip. So I am actually hiring a senior PM and a senior data scientist. So if you know someone or you are one of those people, please reach out because I would love to talk to you. But I participate in interviews. I'm always kind of that final round gut check for my team. And, I think for us, one of our biggest core values that we've really been trying to hire for is innovation. We really want people who are going to bring new, unique ideas to the table, because uShip is also unique in that we have employees who have worked at uShip since its founding, who have not left. I think our engineering tenure is like 5 times what the rest of Austin is. People stick around, which is great, and it builds a really unique culture and a really tight-knit family, but it also means that we need to hire in innovation because we need people to bring fresh ideas. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing that we look for right now.
That's really, really awesome. And so let me just officially kind of close out the hour. And again, whoever wants to stick around for 15 minutes would love that. And Robin, I just wanted to say thank you for your time. I loved your presentation, your things that you shared. It's also, I just wanted to say, it's not often when somebody shares some things, they share maybe a case study of something that went wrong. So that's kudos to you to do that. You're very brave to do that. And obviously those learnings are really, really important. So I just wanted to say thanks for being here. Go Austin. And I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. You can reach me on LinkedIn. James Gray is my handle. So I look forward for those who want to say hello. That would be great. So thanks, and everybody for being here. And if folks want to stick around to informally chat for another 15 minutes, we'll be here.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Robin, you mentioned you were looking for a senior PM. Would love to connect. So I'll ping you on LinkedIn.
Yes, please do.
Sounds good.
That's awesome. It's great to make the, connections, and, that's why we're here, and bringing people together. So that's awesome. Do we have other people who are still with us? If you are, feel free to come off video and say hello. Robin, I think we covered all of the questions. One that we did have, I don't know if you saw, did Rob, oh, this was to me privately, so maybe you didn't see this, it was from Sherry. Did Robin say she used a note transcriber to capture notes in her meetings?
Yes. Yeah, we don't use a tool for that, but we do typically have someone in the room, someone facilitating and someone taking notes, so that the facilitator doesn't have to stop the flow of questioning and the user's thinking to write stuff down, but also just so that it is someone's sole responsibility to try and capture as much as possible. We love to get quotations from our customers too, so that when we are building a deck to present to the executive team or our board or something like that, we've got like real customer quotes that we can put in there, which is always fun to have.
For uShip, the vision, you mentioned vision and values, maybe it's a little tangential, but kind of tell me a little bit about kind of the vision of uShip, and how did that come about, and what role did you play in that as well?
Well, good question. So we actually did when our founder left and we brought in our first CEO who was not a founder, we went through an exercise as a senior leadership team to just take a look at, who are we, what do we do, how do we do it, and why do we do it? And so we landed on, the goal of connecting transportation providers with shipping customers was who we are. And we do that by the marketplace, by, B2B activity, things like that. And so we kind of went through this, pyramid exercise of defining what we are. And then from there, we also took a close look at our core values, our existing core values, and asked the question, are they still true? Do we still value execution and innovation and collaboration and, all of those things? And the core value activity we actually did several years ago. We've been through a few iterations of that, led by our HR team. But the mission and vision stuff was an interesting one that we did a few years ago. But I think, no company wants to change their vision and their mission. you should be pretty true to who you are, and you should be able to adapt your product and still be living within your mission. And so I think that for us was the big, to take it back to that first case study, was the big moment of like, we're not doing this anymore, And so that was kind of the moment of, okay, are we going to change foundationally who uShip is to continue in this partnership, or are we going to take a step back and remember who we are and go back to that?
That's awesome.
Hey, Robin. Thanks so much for your presentation and the case studies. I think it's always super helpful to see a framework in action. One thing I was wondering about, given that you are hiring a data scientist, I'd love to get a sense of how quantitative data plays a role within your product development process, because I think what is really interesting about design thinking is that there's a ton of rich qualitative data that you collect, maybe something that isn't directly a table that can be immediately reported. And I kind of love to know your thoughts about balancing that rich qualitative data with like harder quantitative data.
Great question. Yeah. So when I kind of think about the life cycle and product development for us, design thinking is always the first thing that happens. And I think it's really great to understand customers' problems and what moves them and how they interact with our product. All of that is super useful and necessary. I think the next step of that is the quantitative. What does this mean if we actually do this thing? And it can be as high level as what's the engineering cost, but then also, if we build this, what metrics are we tying to it? And so the next step in our process after that is PMs develop lean canvases for every single product that we want to build. And so they go through the process of what's the problem, what are potential solutions, what customer does it impact, how much is it going to cost us, and then what metrics are we moving and by how much. And nothing makes it onto our roadmap unless a lean canvas exists for it. Even then, we look at those business cases and it's like, is it really worth it? Like we just had a conversation yesterday about a tool that marketing needs for affiliate network. And it's going to cost us, $200,000 in engineering effort. And the estimated return in the next year is $200,000. And so we're having the conversation of like, okay, so it nets out to be zero at the end of the year. What's the longevity and the long-term return on investment of this tool? And will we get that back, tenfold over the next 5 years? And so that's always stuff that we're looking at. I think it would be detrimental to an organization to only do the design thinking part and then go build product and not think about what impact that's having on your product metrics. And that's where I think the severity thing comes in, because there may be a problem, but if it's not a big enough problem that people are willing to change their process or bring your tool into the process, then it doesn't matter. Like you shouldn't build that at that point. And so some of those metrics can help, bring some of that to the surface. If we build this over here, we know conversion from this page to this page is only 2%. So if we add this thing, we now think conversion will be 15%, which then if all metrics are true down the rest of the funnel, that equates to an extra, $2 million in revenue. And now that's tangible. And that also helps sell it to the executive team and the board and points back to that value of the design thinking process.
Thanks so much. Yeah, really helpful to see kind of the full intent on that.
A great question.
For AI and ML, kind of how does that fit into design thinking and the process itself? Is it more like from a solution standpoint, this could be part of the solution that we're discovering through that qualitative research, and then if so, validating it, or just kind of curious about its role. You're hiring a data scientist, so obviously you're thinking about it.
Yeah, so we, honestly right now, the vast majority of our data science effort has been poured into pricing, developing pricing algorithms, anticipating price changes in the market based on carrier capacity, weather patterns. COVID blew it up because when states started closing borders, it was like, shoot, we can't even, truck can't get into Texas. What do we do now? And are people going to pay extra for that because they need their stuff? So there was a lot of just anticipating patterns in the market. I think longer term for us, that's a lot more of, we've used different models even to extract data from our huge, massive, database to say, what patterns of language do we see over and over again? Like, can we anticipate what listings are more likely to book based on what happens in the Q&A section of that listing? And so I think there's a lot of different unique use cases for it. I would say in the context of design thinking, we've leveraged some of those insights from pattern recognition and things like that to inform maybe some of the questions that we ask, but we don't necessarily base, those exercises off of it. But I do think, any technology company who's not thinking about how to automate and start, the smart learning process for your tool over time is probably doing too much manual effort. So I think that'll continue to be a part of what we do and how we develop our product going forward.
Thanks.
And as a follow-up to that, given that your product platform has an AI ML component within it, do you see design thinking changing anytime you have to work on a new feature for that arm of the product?
Good question. I'm sure that it will. I think, while we're in that space, we are certainly not pioneers or, crushing it in the machine learning area at uShip. It's an aspiration of ours, I think. So right now, probably not. I think longer term it will, though, because as we're able to train behavior in our models, and also get more insights out of those models as they become more sophisticated, it may remove the need for some of the questions we would have had to ask. Maybe we're, much more focused on future thinking stuff at that point because things are happening automatically. That's a good question, though. I'm going to keep thinking on that because I'm sure that it will. I just don't know how yet.
Within your product management toolbox, design thinking is one of them, right? What are some other kind of core methodologies that you employ at uShip besides design thinking to kind of round out your product managers and design process?
Good question. So I mentioned lean canvases. That's a big one for us. Teaching people to build a business case, validate, at least to a certain degree, is it worth doing this work? We also follow a quarterly planning cycle. So we kind of tend to plan out roughly a quarter's worth of work at a time. And so we also, because of that, have built-in capacity for the PMs to, post quarterly planning. You're now starting any design thinking practices you need to do for the next quarter. Is there stuff we need to get ahead of now? Right now the stuff we're researching is for next year because it is such a big thing for us. But getting out ahead of what's coming next. And so for me, that just affords the team a lot more time to research and feel confident in the decisions that they're making. I'm trying to think what other practices we have that are maybe a little more abnormal compared to other organizations. We do also have, every other week, we have stakeholder meetings, and that's an opportunity for the PMs to present out to their stakeholders what we're working on and where we are in the process. And we think about everything through two workflows. One, where are we in the product development process? So is it in research? Is it in planning? Is it in development? Is it in testing? Or is it in production? And then we also think about it in the customer life cycle. And so one of the things that we have done more recently is align our PMs with different phases of the customer journey. And so we have a PM who owns, the pre-listing experience on uShip, which is acquisition and getting them into the funnel. Then someone owns, that listing experience all the way up to booking with the carrier, and then the post-booking experience, which is all of that on-platform communication. How do I pay you? All of that different stuff. So I think really, I would say foundationally, the design thinking, the lean canvas, and those stakeholder sessions are kind of the three key things within, the envelope of Agile that we're doing regularly.
Thanks. And are your development teams also staffed with the product managers as well? Mm-hmm. Do they have standalone teams?
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I know we're at quarter of, and Robin, thank you very much. I loved it. Thanks everybody who joined. I'm just going to turn it over really quickly to my colleague Andy, and we'll officially close it out. I hope to see you all next month.
Yeah,
Andy?
thanks everyone for attending today, and thanks to our sponsors at Amplitude for making it all happen, and to Robin for such a great presentation. We'll see you guys next time.
All right.
Thanks, y'all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.